The world economy revolves around the global maritime trade, and this country is set to be a game changer within it. This is Canada. Canada's Arctic coastline, spanning approximately 39,000 miles, is a pivotal location for global maritime trade. The Arctic's strategic importance becomes clearer when you consider the hard numbers that global trade plays in the world. Over 80% of the planet's merchandise is transported through the ocean. That's more than 35% of global trade by volume and 60% by commercial value carried in container ships. You see, countries with ports along established sea routes hold significant economic power. By controlling access to these ports, nations can influence the economic activities of both developed and developing countries. In this particular scenario, Canada's Arctic location grants it a unique advantage, positioning it as a key player on the global stage. What's important to note is that Canada has a potentially massive ace up its sleeve. There's a waterway in the Canadian Arctic that's grabbing a ton of attention. But not just ordinary attention. We're talking about major countries, including the United States, China, and Russia, all having their eyes very closely set on this area. We're talking about a potentially brand new geopolitical storm that's developing in the coming future, all with seeds that are being sown right as you watch this video. And you won't believe that in this mix, the United States has a bit of a quabble with Canada as well, one that's left many experts scratching their heads, since both countries have such a strong relationship with each other. To make it even more confusing and serious at the same time, the Earth's warming climate is accelerating every country's attention to the Arctic for security reasons as well. This is especially the case for Russia, which has an opening flank along its massive northern coastline in the Arctic, as more and more polar ice melts from warming oceans. But let's back up for a second. Why is all this so serious? Well, it's because countries that dominate strategic choke points along global maritime trade routes wield considerable power and influence on the international stage. The Suez Canal is a prime example of such a choke point. Basically, this canal is a 120-mile artificial waterway in Egypt, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. This vital trade route between Europe and Asia grants Egypt, the canal's operator and controlling country, significant strategic influence. Take, for example, during a recent incident when a large tanker became lodged across the canal. Global trade suffered massive losses, estimated at over $9 billion per day. This event underscored the canal's critical importance to the world economy, and a country that's in charge of such an important waterway gets to call the shots. This makes Egypt a pretty important country with a lot of influence, and that's also why every country wants to be in that position, as in to be able to dictate how and when its maritime waterways are used. Countries that are lucky enough to have this strategic advantage invest a lot in their maritime infrastructures. So this brings us to the big question. Where does Canada fall into the global maritime trade scene? Well, apparently it's very high. Canada's strategic location, an abundance of ice-free ports along its extensive coastline, make it a titan in the global maritime trade arena. Get this, 40% of Canada's landmass falls within the Arctic and northern regions, and over 75% of its national coastlines are located in the Arctic, making it the world's longest Arctic coastline. Despite this vast territory, Canada's Arctic population is relatively small, with just 200,000 inhabitants, half of whom are Indigenous. While Canada's current Arctic influence is significant, its future potential in the region could eclipse its present achievements. To understand why, we must consider Canada's role in shaping future global maritime affairs due to a changing maritime trade landscape. As the global landscape shifts, the Arctic's importance is growing. Nations are vying for a position in this region, recognizing its potential to reshape global trade. The global chessboard is being rearranged, with Canada and Russia vying for the top spot in this high-stakes game. More on that, and China, real soon. For now, understanding the current maritime trade framework is critical to grasping its implications. To see what the fuss is all about, we have to understand the Arctic polar region. This region, located around the Earth's North Pole, encompasses the Arctic Ocean, its neighboring seas, and parts of several countries. Canada holds a prominent position within this region, possessing the largest proportion of landmass compared to its Arctic neighbors. Stretching from the Canadian northwestern territories of Nunavut and Yukon to the northern reaches of several provinces below them, Canada stands as the most Arctic country among all. The second most important country is the Kingdom of Denmark, with Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland being the most important. Greenland might be a familiar name, with its vast land spread right across the Arctic region. Known as the world's largest non-continental island, it is largely uninhabitable. Only 15% of it is populated, with 17 towns and 58 villages being its pride and joy. All the rest of it is covered with ice caps. The third Arctic nation is Finland, with approximately 1/3 of its territory, including Lapland, situated above the Arctic Circle. Despite its vast Arctic region, Lapland is sparsely populated, accounting for just 3% of Finland's total population. Here's number 4. This is Iceland, known as the Land of Fire and Ice. Within it, the two territories, Grimsey and Kolbeinsey, lie within the Arctic Circle. Number 5 is Norway, that boasts of a significant Arctic presence, with nearly half of its landmass falling within the Arctic region, including the Nordland, Troms, and Finnmark counties, Svalbard, and Jan Mayen Island. While Norway's Arctic population is relatively small, its Arctic maritime area is vast, equivalent to the combined size of France, Germany, and Spain. Sweden, another Scandinavian country, has 2 Arctic territories, Västerbotten and Norrbotten. These regions constitute 1/3 of Sweden's land area, but are home to only 500,000 people. And that brings us to Russia, a major Arctic power, which has over 15,000 miles of Arctic coastline encompassing vast territories. Over 2 million Russians live in these Arctic areas, representing almost half of the entire Arctic's total population. As such, Russia has the potential to be a serious contender in the new game, and its potential to rival Canada is a factor that cannot be ignored. Initially, this competition had taken on a military angle in terms of spending, but things are getting serious now with the deployment of specialized forces by China, Canada, and Russia for a potential future disagreement in the region. The race between countries surrounding the Arctic to assert claims in the area and the vital resources beneath the ocean's surface has reached a critical juncture. Increasingly, the US, Denmark, Canada, Norway, and Iceland are deeply concerned about the expanding military clout of their northern neighbor Russia, which happens to be the country dominating this race. And finally, the United States became a late addition to this list of Arctic nations after acquiring Alaska in 1867. Its Arctic territories include the North Slope and Northwest Arctic boroughs and Nome census area. And this is real important because the US has growing interests in this region as well, particularly due to the maritime trade and also security. So what's all the fuss about here? What's Russia's problem? And why is Canada such a big threat? Where does China fall into this, given that it isn't even an Arctic nation? Well, getting to know this polar region a bit closer is a real good place to start. The pillar of future global trade. The pursuit of Arctic trade routes is a long-standing human aspiration, and potential for an ice-free Arctic has ignited intense competition in the region. The Northwest Passage, a coveted sea route connecting the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, has long been sought as a more efficient alternative to traditional tropical routes. However, challenging conditions hindered early attempts, leading many to doubt its existence. Finally, in 1906, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen made history by successfully navigating the entire Northwest Passage. His journey, though arduous, marked a significant achievement in Arctic exploration. While Amundsen's success paved the way, commercial vessels couldn't follow suit for over a century. That's because it had taken him 3 long years to complete the journey, and the route he discovered had been too shallow to allow cargo ships to pass through. Today, the quest to use the Northwest Passage for trade has been made possible by the Earth's warming trend in climate. The Arctic region is warming at a higher rate, accelerating the melting of polar ice caps. A scientific expedition in 2006 not only proved that the passage was now navigable, but it served as evidence of this melting phenomenon. At the time, this melting led to a substantial increase in shipping traffic through the Northwest Passage. Experts predicted that nearly 5% of global shipping trade could be conducted through the Arctic region by 2050. It became clear at this point that controlling access to these waters offers significant economic advantages, where Canada holds a strategic position, as the Northwest Passage primarily runs through its internal waters. So, things started moving pretty fast within that decade, the 2010s to be exact. By 2013, the Danish bulk carrier Miss Nordic Orion made a historic journey through the largely ice-free Northwest Passage, the first voyage of its kind. This was a momentous journey since it established the efficacy of the new route that shortened the trade journey by 4 days, increased cargo capacity, and reduced fuel costs. These developments sparked excitement within the trade community about the potential establishment of an east-west route. And these were pretty exciting developments, but the question is, what does this route look like? The emerging power. A journey through the Northwest Passage begins in the Davis Strait, located in Nunavut, Canada. From there, ships navigate northward through Baffin Bay and into the Canadian archipelago, a collection of islands separated from mainland Canada by a series of Arctic waterways. These waterways, collectively known as the Northwest Passages or Canadian Internal Waters, provide a route westward through the Beaufort Sea and Chukchi Sea, eventually leading to the Bering Strait and the Pacific Ocean. The Northwest Passage presents several challenges, including ice, extreme cold, and remoteness, which could hinder rescue efforts. It remains heavily covered in ice during the winter and spring, posing risks to navigation. The number of icebergs and floating ice flows increases in summer, further complicating the journey. For this reason, it's advisable to use an icebreaker escort, especially until the ice melts significantly. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor and hit that like button. Also, be sure to subscribe and tap that bell icon so you never miss out on more mind-bending content. You're officially part of the Republic now. So basically, if the current warming trend continues, the Arctic could experience ice-free periods within the next decade or two. That's with the average annual global surface temperature in the Arctic being expected to rise by 4 to 13 degrees Celsius by 2100. Already, the receding Arctic ice has led to a surge in shipping traffic through the region. The Arctic Council Working Group on the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment recently published a report on the 10-year trends in Arctic shipping, utilizing its Arctic Ship Traffic Data System. According to the report, the number of ships entering the Arctic Polar Code area increased by 37% from 2013 to 2023, which is an increase in roughly 500 ships in a decade. But with maritime trade routes already established all over the world, why does the Arctic matter so much? Well, put simply, the new trade routes cut traveling time for goods. This saves billions of dollars for the world economy, and whichever country controls these routes enjoys the greatest benefit. For example, a vessel traveling from Japan to Western Europe, which typically uses the Suez Canal, can reduce its journey by up to 6,000 miles by using the Bering Strait instead. This shorter route enables shipping operators to save money by combining reduced travel time with slower sailing speeds. Super slow sailing doubles a vessel's energy efficiency, leading to lower fuel costs and also reduced greenhouse gas emissions. These measures can result in up to 40% savings in fuel costs. The reduced travel times allow ships to make more trips in a given year, increasing revenue and profits. This also results in reduced fuel and supplies necessary to make the trip, saving weight and thus increasing cargo capacity. Another amazing fact is that the Northwest Passage is a natural waterway, not a man-made one. It's also really wide. That means it can accommodate larger ships than the Panama Canal, resulting in additional economic and environmental benefits, on top of the obvious volume capacity benefit it has. This might be great news for some, but it would also mean that both the Suez and Panama Canals would be losing their importance and experience a drop in their revenues. That would affect not just the canal operation, but also the countries that they belong to. This passage is really set to shake up the maritime trade system, with new alliances emerging and many countries repositioning themselves on the global chessboard. In fact, it's actually heating up so much that there's an internal power struggle emerging within the Arctic region itself. Will friends be foes? The Northwest Passage traverses the waters of Canada, the United States, and Denmark. While relations between Canada and the United States have historically been cordial, this passage has the potential to introduce a new layer of complexity. The primary point of contention revolves around navigational rights. The United States, supported by other maritime nations, argues that the Northwest Passage is an international strait open to all vessels. They point to the Danube River and the Danish Straits as examples. Since ancient times, the Danube has been a traditional trade route in Europe. It's linked to the North Sea via the Rhine-Main-Danube Canal, connecting it at Bamberg via Nuremberg to Kelheim. Meanwhile, the Danish Straits connect the Baltic Sea to the North Sea. Historically, the Danish Straits were internal waterways of Denmark, but that changed following territorial losses. Canada, however, insists it has exclusive jurisdictions over the Northwest Passage, claiming that it is its internal waterway. The Canadian government insists that the case of the Northwest Passage is different from the Danube and Danish Straits, which provide access to landlocked countries. The Northwest Passage does not. Canada also argues that the limited use of the Northwest Passage precludes its designation as an international waterway under international law. In all reality, an unmanaged Northwest Passage poses a lot of risks. Canada's northern sea routes could become vulnerable to drug trafficking, illegal immigration, terrorism, and weapons of mass destruction as it melts. If the passage remains international waters, Canada's government would be unable to conduct maritime interventions, compromising its ability to adequately surveil its northern territory. In fact, it's already happening, and recent incidents have highlighted these risks. Canada has a long history of responsible maritime stewardship, as evidenced by its founding membership in the International Maritime Organization. And that isn't a small thing, as the IMO sets global standards for safe, secure, and environmentally sound shipping practices. Canada has in fact been re-elected to the IMO Council recently after its membership expired and actively participates in Arctic cooperation and protection. While Canada has ambitious plans for its Arctic coastline, it remains committed to responsible development. Its priority is to minimize the environmental impact of trade activities on the irreplaceable ecosystems that support the Inuit way of life in its Arctic belt. The country has a history and commitment to supporting the Inuit people of the region. It is also the biggest investor in the marine training program, set up to attract more women, Indigenous people, and Northerners to work in the marine sector. To address the Inuit people's habitat and environment concerns, Canada has proposed establishing an emissions control area in Canadian Arctic waters. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. As a leader in marine biotechnology, Canada is conducting promising research through its National Seafarers Welfare Board. Concerned about their well-being, it champions the welfare of seafarers and addresses the challenges they face in Arctic waters. Canada played a pivotal role in launching the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment in 2000, involving scientists from 15 countries and Arctic indigenous peoples. The assessment's findings significantly influenced climate change policy discussions. But despite some of the realities, historically, Canada and the United States have simply agreed to disagree over Northwest Passage navigational rights, since using the passage was already difficult whenever the subject came up. However, the changing environment has dragged this issue out into the open once again, and it has the potential to turn into a serious point of contention. Eyes on China and Russia. The facts are proof positive that Canada is completely committed to the maritime sector. Its efforts in this field should eliminate any doubts about its capacity to manage maritime shipping in its own backyard. The country's ambitions are mainly driven by its concern for the economy, since maritime trade is a way of life for a large chunk of the Canadian population. Its extensive network of ports of call in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans, as well as the Great Lakes, help the country's economy flourish. These activities generated 30,000 jobs and $345 billion in revenue in 2022 alone. Canada stood as the sole generator of 23% of the total international trade in the same year. It raked in $194 billion through its ports and marine shipping, and a further $151 billion through exports the same year. All in all, Canadian port authorities handled almost 340 million tons of total cargo volume in 2022, a figure that has increased exponentially through the years. Though these figures are mind-boggling to us, the fact remains that Canada's true potential for maritime trade hasn't been tapped yet. Imagine the scope of profit it's most likely to accrue once that 0.35 million square miles stretch of Arctic territories around the Northwest Passage is utilized properly. Developing this region could position Canada as a leading global economy. The economic activities generated by the passage could even revitalize Canada's underdeveloped far north. But before the Northwest Passage can be opened for trade, a legal framework must be established. Currently, the only such accord is the 1988 Arctic Cooperation Agreement between the United States and Canada. This requires the United States to obtain Canada's consent before sending icebreakers through the Northwest Passage. With the changing circumstances, the United States has stopped adhering to this agreement. The need for new agreements is evident, but the United States is avoiding negotiating them, potentially to avoid conceding to Canada's claim of the Northwest Passage as internal waters. But while Canada has never expressed intentions to restrict any country's use of the passage, it maintains that the passage requires management, for which Canada is well suited. But this begs the question, what shape would this management take? Well, the main is simply charging fees for its use, and the other is allowing free use without any rules governing it. Charging fees for using the Northwest Passage offers benefits to both Canada and the world. It could reduce shipping traffic, protect the Arctic environment, and generate revenue for maritime projects and Inuit communities. However, excessive fees could hinder trade. On the other hand, free access, while attractive, could also have drawbacks. It could increase environmental risks and negatively impact the Inuit way of life. While it could attract more shipping traffic to Canadian ports, and even indirectly lead to many countries seeking bilateral agreements with the country, this option doesn't seem as attractive from a security standpoint. The first option is the only one that really makes sense. Well, the region is ripe for competition between countries rimming the Arctic, but there are others who would also want to use this route. The Arctic Council is member to 12 other observer states, besides the Club of 8, and the most prominent amongst them is this one, China. China is the world's largest trading economy and the world's largest exporter of goods. From 2019 to 2021, its share in global trade increased from 13 to 15%. Though it stagnated at 14% in 2023, its share of total exports of goods from developing countries has increased from 42% in 2017 to more than 50% in 2023. This is why China sees the Arctic as the setting stage for the next great game. China recognizes the Arctic's potential to disrupt traditional trade routes and has closely studied the Northwest Passage. Facing competition from other developing nations seeking to challenge its manufacturing dominance, they've taken steps to increase Arctic presence. In 2016, China published a guide on navigating the Northwest Passage and declared itself a near-Arctic state in 2018. In 2023, Beijing sent its first domestically built polar icebreaker on an Arctic expedition. While they claim to respect international law, China's history of never-ending territorial disputes raises concerns about its intentions in the Arctic. And as other nations seek to establish a presence in this emerging region, China's actions will be closely monitored. But China isn't the only country gunning for complete control of this area. There's another country with its sights set on the prize, and it isn't playing games. A country that's currently developing a more buddy-buddy relationship with China. Yeah, you've probably already guessed it, Russia. Canada's exclusive economic zone extends 200 nautical miles from its coast, covering approximately 2.9 million square kilometers. However, the law of the sea allows countries to claim additional territory if they can prove their continental shelf extends beyond this limit. To make this claim, countries must submit scientific evidence to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. Canada began collecting data in 2003 and submitted its claim in 2019 with an update in 2022. The Commission would evaluate this claim and make recommendations, but if there are overlapping claims, negotiations between countries would be necessary. This is where it gets interesting. In 2021, Russia made a bold claim, extending its continental shelf to overlap with Canada's and Denmark and Greenland's exclusive economic zones. This claim could give Russia control over 75% of the central Arctic Ocean seabed. In reaction, Canada responded by expanding its claimed continental shelf to 2.4 million square kilometers. The UN Commission's evaluation of Canada's claim is expected to take several years. What's alarming is that Russia has a very strong case in its favor since it has a sizable share in the Arctic region. The melting of the Arctic ice has transformed its very long border, stretching over 15,000 miles above the Arctic Circle, into a vulnerable frontier. Meanwhile, Russia is not in the mood for a waiting game. Even before its conflict with Ukraine, it had been rapidly modernizing its military, with a particular focus on the Arctic. Once shielded by impassable polar ice, Russia's northern flank is now exposed. To counter this new threat, it has revitalized its northern military infrastructure. Dozens of old Soviet-era outposts have been reopened, radar stations upgraded, and border posts fortified. The receding ice has forced Russia to adopt a 360-degree approach to its defense, emphasizing on air power to monitor vast distances. The old air base at Nagurskoye, Russia's northernmost outpost, has been expanded to accommodate modernized MiG-31 fighter jets and advanced missile systems. Also, the Navy's Northern Command, elevated to a military district in 2021, has been equipping its fleet with new ships and hypersonic missiles. Regular military exercises along the northern coastline simulate defending and retaking ports from potential adversaries. Russia's Arctic expansion reflects a strategic shift in response to the changing geopolitical landscape. The once impenetrable north has become a new frontier, demanding significant investment in military preparedness. And even if its claim is approved, Canada will still need to negotiate with this more evolved version of Russia to establish boundaries. The stakes of these negotiations are significant, and their outcome could have significant consequences. Yet still, the United States is not in favor of Canada taking the lead on this issue. But the problem is that if it drags its feet the way it has in the past, it could lose the passage to its arch rivals, China and Russia. It would be better positioned to support Canada, who's one of its closest allies, and work with them to maintain a beneficial policy through the region. Sort of how Canada and the United States work together to form the North American Identification Zone in the sky. But consider this before you form any opinion. Due to thinning ice and advancements in technology, deep seabed drilling for oil and natural gas in the Arctic is now a technical possibility. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the Arctic holds 22% of the world's undiscovered energy resources. Arctic resources include 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered gas. More precisely, that translates to a mind-bending 12,000 cubic miles of natural gas and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. 84% of these resources are expected to occur offshore under the Arctic Ocean. Due to not being a party to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, the U.S. has limited international legal jurisdiction over Arctic exploration. Without membership, the U.S. cannot secure international legal rights beyond the 200-mile limit of its present economic zone. Ratifying the convention laws could grant the U.S. recognized international rights to 600 miles of extended continental shelf, but it has yet to make any moves in that direction. Meanwhile, other countries, such as Russia and Canada, have already submitted claims reaching the North Pole, while the U.S. has already missed a golden opportunity. If you thought things are getting kind of crazy, here's something more wild. A potential conflict between Canada and the United States over control of part of the Beaufort Sea could arise within this decade. This area is believed to be rich in undiscovered Arctic oil and gas reserves. Such a conflict could overshadow the ongoing disputes over the Northwest Passage. What's more is that onshore areas in Canada, Russia, and Alaska have already been explored for hydrocarbons, leading to the discovery of over 400 oil and gas fields north of the Arctic Circle. Currently, approximately 2.6 million barrels of fossil fuels are extracted daily from the Russian and Canadian Arctic. Even Norway, known for its green policies, initiated a process in January to open areas of its extended continental shelf for mineral exploration and production, with plans to issue the first licenses. It's clear that the Northwest Passage is emerging as the Wild West of the Arctic frontier. Left unmanaged, the passage could present a clear danger to world peace. Enjoyed the video? Make sure you're subscribed and click one of these thumbnails to dive right back into more mind-bending content. See you soon.